Dan and Kalu had been exploring the wilderness for days, capturing breathtaking footage for their nature documentary. The tall grass swayed under a gentle breeze as the two men walked through the reserve, camera in hand, searching for their next subject. Dan, with his camera lens focused on the beauty surrounding them, was so engrossed in his work that he didn't notice the potential danger beneath his feet until Kalu shouted, "Dan, stop! Watch out!" Startled, Dan froze in his tracks. "What? What is it?" he asked, confused. Kalu pointed down, and Dan's gaze followed. He had nearly stepped on a nest. Curious, he crouched down for a closer look, but was once again interrupted by Kalu's warning. "Be careful, Dan. That's a mamba nest, a black mamba." Dan's heart skipped a beat. "A mamba?" he echoed, now fully aware of the danger. The black mamba, one of the deadliest snakes in the world, was not to be trifled with. "Yeah, those are extremely dangerous," Kalu said, his voice laced with concern. Dan, however, was undeterred. His curiosity outweighed his caution. This could be incredible footage for the documentary, he thought. Despite Kalu's protests, Dan set up his camera on a stand, positioning it to capture whatever activity might occur in the nest. After ensuring the camera was hidden among the vegetation, they left the area to continue their journey, marking their trail for future reference. As they ventured deeper into the reserve, Dan felt a strange sensation, as though they were being watched. He glanced around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, dismissing the feeling as just his nerves after the mamba encounter. The day passed in a blur of filming various wildlife, but by dusk, they decided to return to the mamba nest to retrieve the camera. Upon arriving, they found the nest scattered with broken eggshells, but no snakes. What concerned them even more was the presence of feathers surrounding the nest. "This doesn't make sense," Dan said, furrowing his brow. He cautiously retrieved the camera, keeping an eye on the area in case the mother mamba was lurking nearby. Back at camp, the two men eagerly reviewed the footage, expecting to see the snake eggs hatching. What they found instead left them speechless. Rather than snakes emerging from the eggs, bird-like creatures had hatched. "What on earth?" Dan whispered, confused. "Could the snake have built its nest around another animal's eggs?" Kalu suggested, equally puzzled. As they fast-forwarded through the footage, they spotted a blur in the background that raised more questions. Dan rewound the footage, playing it back at normal speed. There, in the shadows, they saw a figure approaching the nest in the dead of night. The figure reached down, carefully swapping out the mamba eggs with bird eggs. Both men were stunned. Someone tampered with the nest. Kalu exclaimed, disbelief etched across his face. Dan's mind raced. "This could be huge for the documentary," he said, realizing the implications of what they had just uncovered. Determined to figure out who was behind the egg swapping, they decided to take the evidence to the nearest ranger station. The next morning, they set out early, arriving after a 2-hour hike. The ranger on duty, visibly shocked by the footage, expressed both anger and concern. "This is serious," he said, shaking his head. Dan and Kalu explained that they wanted to help catch whoever was responsible. The ranger, fueled by the discovery, was eager to act, but explained that his colleague, who could assist, wouldn't be back until the next day. Dan, ever the adventurer, volunteered to help set up a trap for the culprit. They strategized, deciding to set up surveillance at another nest in the area, hoping to catch the figure in the act again. With dusk approaching, they moved quickly, ensuring the eggs in the second nest were still intact. Once everything was in place, Dan set up a hidden camera, while Kalu and the ranger set up camp nearby, ready to watch the live feed. As night fell, tension hung in the air. Hours passed in silence, but eventually, a figure emerged from the tall grass. They watched in anticipation as the person approached the nest. Dan's heart pounded as he realized they were about to catch the culprit red-handed. But as the figure drew closer, the ranger suddenly stood up, his expression one of surprise. "Wait," he muttered. The person approaching wasn't the suspect. They were the ranger's colleague, arriving a day early. "What's going on?" the confused colleague asked. After an explanation, the group shared a relieved laugh, but their attention quickly shifted back to the task at hand. Moments later, they heard footsteps rustling through the grass again. This time, it wasn't the ranger's colleague. The real intruder was nearby. The group quickly hid, taking cover in the surrounding foliage. From his vantage point, Dan could see the figure moving closer to the nest. The person knelt down, reached into their bag, and prepared to make another egg swap. Dan's camera was still rolling, capturing every moment. "We've got him," Dan thought. In a synchronized movement, Dan, Kalu, and the two rangers sprang from their hiding spots, catching the culprit completely off guard. The intruder froze in shock, and the rangers quickly restrained him. "Isn't this?" the ranger began, recognizing the man. His colleague nodded grimly. The man wasn't a stranger to them. He had recently applied for a job at the reserve, only to be turned down due to budget cuts. Back at the ranger station, they interrogated the man, who reluctantly confessed to his plan. Angry about losing the job, he had hoped to sabotage the reserve's reputation by making it appear as though the rangers were neglecting their duties, allowing dangerous animals like the mamba to breed unchecked. By replacing the eggs, he intended to cause confusion and draw negative attention to the reserve, in the hopes that one of the rangers would be fired and he could take their place. Dan and Kalu were stunned by the revelation. "What a story this has turned out to be," Dan said, shaking his head. The ranger, still processing the betrayal, thanked them profusely. "If it weren't for you two, we never would have caught him," he said, grateful for their intervention. In the end, Dan's nature documentary took a different turn than he had originally planned. Instead of focusing solely on the beauty of the wildlife in the reserve, it now highlighted the dark side of human interference in nature. The documentary became a critical success, shedding light on the importance of protecting natural habitats from those who would exploit them for personal gain. All the profits from the documentary went towards a foundation Dan started, dedicated to funding conservation efforts and ensuring that nature reserves around the world had the resources they needed to thrive.